The queen infected by her husband. The final night of Maria de Medici. You step into a cold, narrow room in Cologne, 1642. The candle burns low, its flame shivering against the winter wind slipping through cracked shutters. The air is thick with the faint scent of decay, undercut by the lingering trace of lavender water, the last luxury of a queen whose reign is long gone. On the bed lies a frail woman, her fingers trembling as they clutch a rosary, her eyes half closed, haunted. This is Maria de Medici, once the Queen of France, daughter of Florence's wealthiest dynasty. The walls remember the roar of her palaces, the murmur of courtiers, the laughter of children who no longer visit. But tonight there is only silence, a silence that presses down like the weight of a crown now turned to stone. Her breath comes in shallow rasping whispers, her body is fragile, marked by a disease born of desire and betrayal. She murmurs the names of her children, the very children who have long abandoned her. Every labored exhale carries the echo of ambition and the sting of isolation. The candle flickers one final time, casting shadows that twist across the walls like memories of a life lost to power, politics, and treachery. You realize, this is not just the story of a fallen queen. It is the story of love corrupted, of ambition punished, and of a disease that whispered ruin into her veins. Before the darkness claimed her, her story had already been written, in betrayal, ambition, and suffering. She was born into gold and grief. Florence, 1575, the palaces of the Medici gleamed with marble, silk, and deception. Maria's cradle was carved from ivory, yet her first lullaby was the whisper of intrigue. Her father, Francesco de Medici, ruled with paranoia. Her mother, Joanna of Austria, was found dead, her body broken at the foot of the palace stairs. Rumors said it was an accident. Others murmured darker things. In the Medici household, death was a frequent guest. Maria grew up surrounded by opulence, yet she understood early that love and safety were rarer than gold. Tutors schooled her in art and theology, but her truest lessons came from the court: trust no one, and smile even when the poison is in your cup. Even as a child, her portrait was painted for diplomacy, not affection. She was a pawn, sculpted for marriage before she knew what love meant. Born in gold, raised in grief. Her destiny was not written in stars, but in signatures. France needed a queen. King Henry IV, restless and pragmatic, sought an alliance with Florence. Maria's immense dowry, 600,000 crowns, made her irresistible, not as a woman, but as a transaction. When she arrived in France, the bells of Paris rang in celebration. But the king barely looked at her. He was already entangled with mistresses, courtiers, and political plots. Their first meeting was a humiliation. He joked of her accent, her figure, her foreignness. Courtiers snickered. Maria bowed her head, the gold of her crown feeling heavier than iron. She was queen by name, stranger by heart. Nights in the royal chambers were colder than her Florentine winters. She learned quickly that affection could not be bought, not even with a dowry that could rebuild a kingdom. A wedding without love, a union without mercy. The crown glittered, but its weight was loneliness. Love was not the only thing Henry IV shared. His passion for women was legendary, his carelessness even more so. Physicians whispered of a disease that clung to him, the invisible fire of the flesh, an affliction we now know as syphilis. Maria, dutiful and loyal, shared his bed and soon shared his fate. At first, it was exhaustion, then fevers, then fainting spells. Physicians offered mercury treatments, cruel, archaic remedies that poisoned her slowly while promising cure. Her body weakened, her beauty faded beneath the silks and jewels that hid the truth. She smiled for portraits and banquets, her skin blistered beneath paint and perfume. In public, she was radiant. In private, she shivered. At court, no one spoke of it, not because they didn't know, but because royal blood was never allowed to show weakness. Her crown glittered. Her body decayed. In silence, the infection of the body became the infection of the soul. When Henry IV was assassinated in 1610, Maria became regent for her young son, Louis XIII. Finally, she had power, or so she thought. She filled her council with Italian advisers, men of her homeland who understood her language and loyalty. But to the French nobility, They were foreign intruders. They mocked her accent, her decisions, her very existence. The same courtiers who had ignored her as queen now despised her as ruler. They called her the Florentine widow, accusing her of greed, witchcraft, and treachery. Maria held on to control with trembling hands. She had fought too long to surrender easily. But fear was a silent counselor, and betrayal always lurked nearby. Power never forgives the foreign queen. Every throne is a battlefield. Hers was built on sand. Her enemies no longer hid their contempt. Louis XIII, barely a man, was manipulated by nobles who whispered that his mother sought to control him forever. Her trusted advisor, Concino Concini, was murdered in the streets. Her own son ordered her arrest. The queen who once ruled France was imprisoned in the Château de Blois, a gilded cage with no comfort but prayer. But Maria was no meek captive. One night, dressed in servant's clothes, she escaped through a window, fleeing down a rope into the darkness. She fled across France, rallying what few allies remained. Civil war followed, tearing the nation she once governed. When she was finally reconciled with her son, it was not forgiveness, it was strategy. And waiting at court was Cardinal Richelieu, the man who would shape her fate again, and end her influence forever. Even her victories were written in exile. Freedom, once won, is never free. When Richelieu rose to power, Maria's shadow faded from France. She had played every card, but now she was out of allies, out of wealth, out of time. She wandered through Europe, Brussels, Amsterdam, Cologne. Each city welcomed her briefly, then turned her away when her debts grew too large. Her letters to her children went unanswered. The disease she carried worsened. The tremors in her hands grew severe. Her mind began to slip into confusion. Servants whispered that she spoke to ghosts. She once looked into a cracked mirror and asked, "Do you remember who I was?" The answer never came. Once a queen, now a ghost in rented rooms. Exile is not a place. It is the space between memory and forgetting. In Cologne, she found a small room above a merchant's house. She had no crown, no servants but two loyal women who refused to leave her. Her body was frail, her speech slurred, her memory fractured. She spoke of Florence, of her wedding, of her children, fragments of a life that now felt like a dream. In her final hours, she clutched her rosary and whispered, "Forgive him. Forgive them all." When she died, there was no procession, no anthem, no court mourning. Only silence. The woman who once ruled France was buried quietly in a churchyard, her name fading from memory as if history itself had conspired to forget her. Her body failed. Her memory endured. Even forgotten queens leave echoes. Royal women were not chosen for love, they were chosen for power. Maria de Medici's life was the perfect tragedy of a woman who mistook duty for destiny. Her marriage was an alliance, her motherhood a negotiation, her sickness a secret too shameful for kings. Her story is not only about betrayal, it is about the illusion that privilege protects. Even in palaces, loneliness can rot the soul. As history's ink dries, we see her not as the scheming queen her enemies painted, but as a woman trapped in a role she never asked for. In her suffering, she mirrors every person who has ever been silenced, blamed, or abandoned for their loyalty. From gold to dust, her story warns that power cannot protect the heart. The higher the crown, the deeper the fall. Centuries have passed, yet the silence remains. Today, millions still live with diseases that bring stigma, physical or mental, isolating them from society. Women continue to bear the burden of secrecy and shame, expected to endure quietly, as Maria once did. Modern psychology recognizes what history overlooked: the cost of endurance. Studies link suppression of trauma to illness, loneliness to early death. Power dynamics still dictate whose pain is heard, and whose is dismissed as hysteria. Medical journals speak of treatment. History speaks of memory. Both remind us that silence is the cruelest infection of all. Centuries change. Silence remains. We inherit more than blood. We inherit silence. Maria de Medici died believing she was forgotten. But history never forgets those who suffer for love, loyalty, and pride. Her voice still whispers through the cracked walls of abandoned palaces, reminding us that even queens can be prisoners, of duty, of disease, of the very love they thought divine. She stands among history's silent mourners, her story both warning and elegy. History does not merely repeat, it whispers, reminding us that the brightest crowns often hide the deepest wounds.